The sky above Halivar Prime burned in shades of lavender and gold, the twin suns casting a surreal glow over the sprawling campus of the Galactic Academy. Lyran stood alone at the edge of the observation deck, her reflection a distorted shadow against the polished glass. She wasn't supposed to be here, both in the literal sense and the existential one. Below, the cadets bustled with the energy of youth, their laughter and chatter a symphony of normalcy. Lyran's sharp hearing picked out fragments of conversations, exam stress, new friends, petty rivalries. They spoke in the casual tones of beings who belonged. She could never join them, not fully, and deep down, she'd stopped wanting to. The call to action came abruptly, breaking her reverie. A high-pitched screech tore through the air, followed by a gut-wrenching metallic groan. Lyran snapped her head toward the sound, her heart racing. The skycar was spinning out of control, flames trailing its engine as it hurtled toward the plaza below. Lyran moved before she could think, her body reacting on pure instinct. Sprinting across the observation deck, she vaulted the railing without hesitation. Wind roared past her ears as she plummeted 3 stories, her body bracing for impact. She landed with a force that cracked the stone tiles beneath her boots, her knees absorbing the shock like she'd been built for it. Gasps erupted from the crowd as she pushed off the ground, surging toward the wreckage before the fire could consume the crumpled vehicle. The heat was unbearable, the acrid smoke burning her lungs. But Lyran didn't falter. Her hands found the edge of the warped metal, and with a guttural growl, she tore it apart like it was nothing more than thin foil. Inside, the driver, a young Haliarch male, was unconscious, his violet skin pale and slick with sweat. Lyran yanked him free just as the fire surged, carrying him to safety as the crowd parted in stunned silence. Behind her, the vehicle exploded, sending a shockwave that rippled through the plaza. She shielded the driver with her body, the heat biting into her back like angry claws. When she finally set the injured cadet down, medics were already rushing toward her. She stepped back, breathing hard, her hands shaking with adrenaline. The crowd stared, their wide eyes filled with something far from gratitude. Fear. "She's not one of us," someone whispered, loud enough for her keen ears to catch. The murmurs spread like wildfire. Words like monster and freak cut through her like jagged shards of glass. Lyran clenched her fists, swallowing the anger and hurt rising in her chest. She turned away, ignoring the curious stares of the medics and the hushed conversations around her. Her mentor, Commander Vetrick, was striding toward her, his face a mask of cold control. "You should have waited for the emergency teams," he said, his voice low but firm. His silver eyes bore into hers, searching for an answer to an unspoken question. "He would have died," Lyran replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Perhaps." Vetrick paused, glancing at the crowd that was still frozen in place. "But now you've reminded them of what you are." Lyran didn't flinch, though the word stung. She had been reminded of it, too, of her strength, her speed, and the instincts that had always set her apart. But what choice had she had? As the commander's comm device chimed, breaking the tense silence, Lyran's gaze drifted skyward. The stars above Halivar Prime seemed closer tonight, like they were calling to her. She wanted to believe there was a place for her out there, somewhere beyond the fear and judgment. "Lyran," Vetrick said, his tone sharper now, "you need to come with me. There's something you should see." Her heart sank as she caught the urgency in his voice. Without a word, she followed him, her mind racing. Whatever awaited her next, it wouldn't be the comfort of belonging. It would be a test, and Lyran knew she couldn't afford to fail. The dense air of the moon's surface was oppressive, laden with the acrid scent of decaying vegetation and something metallic that clung to the back of Lyran's throat. She adjusted the filtration mask over her face, her sharp eyes scanning the twisted landscape ahead. The mission briefing had been vague, too vague for her liking. A human ship, they'd said, its wreckage discovered in orbit of this uncharted moon. Her task, to assist the investigation and assess the threat. But the details of how a human ship had made it this deep into controlled space, centuries after humanity's exile, were conspicuously absent. That bothered her more than she let on. "Keep up, cadet," barked Lieutenant Calvos from ahead, his deep-set eyes fixed on the rocky terrain. He'd made it clear from the outset that he didn't trust her inclusion on this mission. Lyran wasn't sure if his disdain stemmed from her Deathworlder traits or from the fact that she outperformed him in every physical evaluation at the Academy. Either way, his scowl hadn't let up since their shuttle landed. She bit back a sharp reply, channeling her focus into their surroundings instead. The moon was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Jagged black spires jutted from the ground like the bones of some ancient, long-dead creature. The air hummed with an eerie, almost imperceptible vibration, as if the planet itself were alive and watching. The team of 6 moved cautiously, their boots crunching against the brittle ground. Lyran could hear every movement, the soft rustle of Calvos's uniform, the faint clink of the medic's gear. Her heightened senses made the silence between sounds deafening, a reminder of how exposed they were. "This place is cursed," muttered one of the cadets, a young Shalvan whose bioluminescent skin cast a faint blue glow in the dim light. "Quiet," Calvos snapped. "Stay focused." Lyran's attention shifted as they crested a rise, revealing the wreckage sprawled across a barren valley below. The ship, or what was left of it, was a mangled husk of metal and fire-scarred plating. A scattering of debris radiated outward, marking the violent crash that had claimed it. Smoke still curled from the twisted remains, the scent sharp and acrid even from this distance. "Spread out," Calvos ordered, his tone sharp. "Scan for survivors. Anything unusual, report it immediately." "Unusual?" Lyran almost laughed. The entire situation was unusual. She descended toward the wreckage, her boots crunching on the brittle surface. The ship's design was alien to her, relic of a bygone era when humans had once moved freely among the stars. The hull bore deep gouges, evidence of a fierce battle. Claw marks, she realized with a chill, far too large to have been made by any conventional weapon. Something shifted in the corner of her vision. She froze, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of the plasma blade at her hip. The movement was subtle, a faint disturbance in the haze of smoke. But it was there. Her heart thudded as she advanced cautiously, her senses sharpening. "Lyran, report," Calvos barked over the comm. She ignored him, her focus narrowing on the disturbance. The others hadn't noticed it, their attention locked on the larger wreckage. As she moved closer, her boots brushed against a faint trail in the dust prints, heavy and deliberate, leading away from the crash. Her breath caught. They were bipedal, too large to belong to anyone on her team. Her pulse quickened as she followed the trail, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. The tracks led to the edge of a jagged rock formation. Lyran rounded the corner, her blade drawn and ready. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. A figure stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, clad in dark, battered armor that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. The visor of the helmet was cracked, revealing a pair of intense, piercing eyes that locked onto hers. Human. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, the man raised a hand, his voice rough and steady. "You're not like the others, are you?" Her breath hitched. "Neither are you." The faintest smile touched his lips before he spoke again. "We need to move. Now." The sound of distant movement echoed behind her, a low, guttural growl that made her blood run cold. Lyran didn't hesitate. She turned and followed the stranger, her instincts screaming that this was only the beginning. Lyran jogged to keep pace with the human, her mind a whirlwind of questions she couldn't yet ask. His armor, scratched and scorched, looked ancient, the kind of gear humanity hadn't manufactured for centuries. Yet he moved with the precision of a seasoned soldier, scanning the terrain ahead with practiced ease. She spared a glance over her shoulder, her sharp senses picking up faint sounds in the distance, low, guttural growls, and the occasional scrape of claws against stone. Whatever was following them was closing in, and it wasn't friendly. "Keep your head down," the man said, his voice calm but commanding. He didn't look back, trusting that she'd follow. "Those things hunt by sound and movement. If they see us, it's over." Lyran gritted her teeth, the primal instinct to turn and fight warring with her sense of survival. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low. The man glanced at her briefly. "Isaac," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for elaboration. "Captain Isaac. And you're human," she pressed, the disbelief heavy in her voice. Last I checked. He shot her a dry smirk before his expression hardened. We need to find cover. There's a cave system about a click west. Move. She didn't argue. The terrain was treacherous, each step threatening to send her tumbling over loose rocks or jagged formations. But Lyran's Deathworlder instincts kicked in, her body moving with an ease that belied the danger. Isaac seemed to notice, his gaze flicking toward her briefly as they ran. "You're not just some cadet, are you?" he asked. Lyran hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "You noticed." "Hard not to," Isaac said. "The way you landed back there? I've seen Deathworlders do that, but none of the species in this sector qualify." Lyran didn't answer. Her mind churned with conflicting emotions. How much did Isaac know about her? About her people? If she could even call them that anymore? She'd grown up knowing she was different, but meeting a human, a true Deathworlder, made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't prepared for. The sound of claws against rock jolted her from her thoughts. It was closer now, echoing ominously in the distance. "Faster," Isaac urged, his pace quickening. The cave system came into view, its dark maw gaping like an ominous portal. Isaac waved her toward it, scanning the area for any signs of movement. Lyran darted inside, her sharp eyes adjusting quickly to the dim light. The space was narrow but deep, offering some measure of protection. Isaac entered behind her, his breathing steady despite the exertion. He moved to the entrance, pulling a small device from his belt. A flicker of light erupted from it, and within moments, a faint energy field shimmered across the cave's entrance. "That won't hold them for long," Isaac said, turning back to her. "But it'll buy us a little time." Lyran leaned against the wall, her heart still racing. "What are those things?" Isaac's face darkened. "Ravagers. Engineered predators. They shouldn't be here, though. Someone brought them." Her stomach tightened. Why would anyone bring them here? "To kill anything left alive after the crash." Isaac's tone was grim, and the weight of his words settled heavily between them. Lyran frowned. "You're saying this was deliberate? Someone wanted you dead?" Isaac nodded. "And anyone who found me." He gestured toward her. "Which now includes you." She crossed her arms, forcing herself to ignore the fear creeping in. "You still haven't explained why you're here. A human ship? In this sector? That's not supposed to be possible." "It wasn't supposed to be," Isaac said, his voice edged with frustration. "But when we picked up a signal, a unique one, coming from this system, I had to investigate. It wasn't just random noise. It was Deathworlder tech." Lyran's breath caught. "That can't be." "Someone else thought it could," Isaac interrupted, "and they were willing to kill for it." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the faint hum of the energy field at the cave's entrance. Lyran stared at the floor, her thoughts racing. If Isaac was telling the truth, then her existence wasn't as unique as she'd been led to believe. There were others like her, or there had been. "We need to figure out who's pulling the strings," Isaac said, his voice softer now. "But first we survive the night." Lyran nodded, steeling herself. Whatever lay ahead, she wouldn't face it alone. For the first time, she wasn't the only one. And for the first time, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. The silence inside the cave was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the energy field at the entrance. Lyran leaned against the cool stone wall, every muscle taut. Her heightened senses picked up the faint rustling of movement outside, ravagers pacing the perimeter. The creatures were methodical, testing for weaknesses, their guttural growls reverberating like distant thunder. Isaac crouched near the entrance, his eyes locked on a holographic display projected from his wrist. "The field's holding for now," he muttered, his tone clipped. "But those things are persistent. We need a plan." "A plan for what?" Lyran asked, keeping her voice low. "There's no way off this moon. And if what you're saying is true, someone's gone to a lot of trouble to make sure we don't leave." Isaac didn't look up. "You're right about one thing. Whoever sent those ravagers didn't do it on a whim. But I've been in worse spots." Lyran raised an eyebrow. "Worse than being hunted by engineered predators on a desolate moon." Isaac glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching into a brief, humorless smile. "Let's just say humans don't get exiled from the galaxy because we're good at playing nice." Her curiosity flared, but she kept it in check. She wasn't sure she was ready to know the full extent of what humanity had done, or been accused of. Instead, she focused on the here and now. What's the plan, then? Isaac tapped a spot on his wrist display, and a rough map of the cave system materialized between them. This isn't just a cave. It's part of a network, old too. The walls are lined with a mineral that blocks most standard scanners. If we can get deep enough, we might lose them. Lyran studied the map. The tunnels twisted and branched unpredictably, a labyrinth that could easily become a death trap. And if we get lost, then we die here, Isaac said bluntly. But sitting still isn't an option. She nodded, appreciating his candor. Lead the way. Isaac stood, shouldering a pack that seemed far too heavy for anyone not built like a Deathworlder. He handed her a small device, an emergency light. Stay close. These tunnels aren't forgiving. The two moved deeper into the cave, the air growing cooler and the darkness pressing in like a living thing. Lyran's sharp eyes adjusted quickly, but the silence gnawed at her nerves. Every now and then, she thought she heard faint echoes, movements that didn't belong to them. Why were you really out here? Lyran asked after a while, breaking the silence. Isaac's steps didn't falter. I told you. We picked up a signal, an old one, encoded in a way only Deathworlders would recognize. My team thought it might be a relic from Earth or one of the colonies. Your team? She pressed. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. They're gone. Killed in the crash, or worse. His tone left no room for elaboration, and Lyran decided not to push further. The tunnels narrowed, forcing them to move single file. The mineral walls glimmered faintly, as if alive, and Lyran's fingers brushed against one, feeling the strange, pulsing warmth. What is this place? She murmured. Deathworlder tech, Isaac said. Or what's left of it. Whoever built this. They knew how to survive. They came to a larger chamber, its ceiling arching high above them. In the center stood a strange, jagged structure, a monolith of dark stone, etched with markings that seemed to shift under the faint glow of their lights. Lyran's breath caught as she approached it, her fingers brushing the surface. The markings pulsed, reacting to her touch. It's responding to you, Isaac said, stepping closer. She shook her head, unease prickling at her spine. Why would it? Her words were cut off by a low rumble. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and from the darkness of the far tunnel, the guttural growls of ravagers echoed once more. This time, they were closer. Too close. Isaac cursed, pulling his weapon. Whatever this thing is, it's a beacon. You just lit up the whole system. Lyran backed away from the monolith, her heart pounding. What do we do? Isaac's eyes hardened. We fight, and we run. In that order. The first ravager appeared at the edge of the chamber, its sleek, black body glinting in the dim light. Its glowing eyes locked on them, and with a chilling roar, it charged. Isaac's weapon barked, the blast lighting up the room. But Lyran didn't wait. She lunged forward, her instincts taking over. For the first time, she didn't hold back. The chamber erupted into chaos as the ravagers surged forward. Lyran felt her instincts take control, her body moving with a fluid precision that seemed almost otherworldly. The first ravager lunged, its claws slashing through the air. She sidestepped the attack with ease, her plasma blade igniting in her hand. The weapon hummed as it carved through the creature's sleek, armored hide. The ravager let out a guttural screech, collapsing in a heap of smoking flesh. Lyran didn't stop, spinning to face the next threat, her movements a blur of speed and ferocity. Behind her, Isaac was a wall of controlled chaos. His rifle barked in rapid bursts, each shot landing with pinpoint accuracy. The ravagers were fast, unnaturally so. But Isaac was faster. He moved like he'd been born in the chaos of combat, his every step calculated to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. On your left, he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. Lyran pivoted, her blade catching a ravager mid-leap. The creature crashed to the ground, twitching as its body gave a final, shuddering spasm. She spared a glance at Isaac, catching the sharp, approving nod he sent her way, before another wave of ravagers poured into the chamber. There's too many, she shouted, her voice tight with effort. Hold them off. Isaac barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and sprinted toward the monolith, his hands moving over the shifting markings with practiced urgency. "What are you doing?" Lyran demanded, slicing through another Ravager as it lunged for her. "Finding us a way out," he replied. "This place is ancient Deathworlder tech. It has to have defenses." Lyran gritted her teeth, fighting back a surge of doubt. Ravagers closed in from all sides, their claws scraping against the stone floor, their glowing eyes locked on her. She let out a sharp breath, her focus narrowing. Time slowed as she tapped into the instincts she'd always feared, her movements becoming a deadly dance of precision and power. Isaac cursed under his breath as the monolith's markings flickered, refusing to respond. "Come on," he muttered, slamming his palm against its surface. "You're not just a rock. Give me something to work with." As if in answer, the chamber trembled, the monolith flaring with a sudden burst of light. The Ravagers froze, their heads snapping toward the glowing structure. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "What did you do?" Lyran shouted, her voice barely audible over the rising noise. "Activated it," Isaac replied, backing away from the monolith. "I think." The light intensified, and suddenly, the monolith released a pulse of energy that swept through the chamber like a tidal wave. The Ravagers shrieked in unison, their bodies convulsing before they collapsed lifelessly to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyran staggered, her blade still humming in her hand. She turned to Isaac, her chest heaving. "You think?" Isaac grinned, his expression equal parts relief and triumph. "Worked, didn't it?" She rolled her eyes, but the tension in her shoulders eased. "What was that?" "An EMP," Isaac said, tapping the monolith. "A localized one. Fried their neural implants, assuming those things have brains." Lyran frowned, stepping closer to the monolith. "This tech, it's more advanced than anything I've ever seen. How do you know how to use it?" Isaac hesitated, his expression darkening. "Let's just say I've had experience with things like this." Before she could press him further, the ground beneath them rumbled again. This time, it wasn't the monolith. The vibrations were deeper, more ominous. "They're not going to stop," Isaac said, his voice low. "Whoever sent those Ravagers knows we're alive. They'll send more." Lyran's stomach tightened. "Then what do we do?" Isaac's eyes met hers, their intensity striking. "We find out who's hunting us, and we stop them before they stop us." He moved toward the far tunnel, his rifle at the ready. Lyran followed, her blade still warm in her grip. For the first time, she felt the weight of something bigger than herself pressing down on her. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. The tunnels stretched on like an endless maze, their walls pulsing faintly with the strange mineral glow. Lyran moved silently behind Isaac, her body coiled with tension. The air was heavier now, laced with the faint metallic tang of something unnatural. It wasn't just the Ravagers, or the hidden hand that controlled them. Something else was at work here, and it was ancient. Isaac stopped abruptly, his hand raised in a signal for silence. Lyran froze, her sharp senses straining. There was a sound, distant, rhythmic, like a faint heartbeat echoing through the stone. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Isaac nodded, his jaw tight. "We're getting close." "Close to what?" "Answers." His tone left no room for argument, but his expression was darker than before, as though he already knew the cost of what they were about to uncover. They pressed on, the sound growing louder with each step. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling disappearing into shadow. In the center, an enormous structure loomed, a spire of jagged black metal, bristling with conduits that pulsed with a sickly green light. The heartbeat-like rhythm emanated from it, each pulse vibrating through the ground. Lyran's breath hitched. "What is that?" Isaac stepped forward cautiously, his rifle raised. "Control hub," he said grimly. "Whoever sent those Ravagers, they're using this to guide them." As if responding to his words, the spire's glow intensified, and a holographic interface flickered to life. Symbols scrolled across its surface, too fast for Lyran to follow. But Isaac's sharp intake of breath told her enough. "This isn't just a control hub," he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. It's a gateway, a beacon for whoever's out there. Lyran stepped closer, her unease growing. Whoever's out there, are they coming? Isaac glanced at her, his expression unreadable. They're already here. Before she could process his words, a deafening roar shook the chamber. The walls trembled as another wave of ravagers poured into the room, their glowing eyes locked on the two of them. But this time, they weren't alone. Behind them, a figure emerged, a towering alien clad in sleek, black armor that shimmered like liquid shadow. Its elongated face was hidden beneath a helmet, but its sheer presence exuded authority. The alien spoke, its voice a guttural rasp that seemed to resonate in Lyran's bones. You have trespassed on forbidden ground. Isaac raised his rifle, his stance steady. And you've been hunting us like animals. So forgive me if I don't apologize. The alien tilted its head, as if studying him. Your kind was exiled for a reason, human. And now you bring ruin to this place. Lyran stepped forward, her blade igniting with a hiss. This place belongs to my people. Whoever you are, you're the trespasser here. The alien's helmet shifted toward her, and for a moment, the room seemed to hum with tension. Your people, it repeated, a hint of something close to amusement in its tone. The remnants of a failed species clinging to forgotten power. You should have stayed buried. Lyran didn't wait for Isaac's signal. She surged forward, her blade slicing through the air. The alien moved with startling speed, blocking her strike with an energy shield that crackled on impact. The ravagers lunged, but Isaac's rifle barked in rapid succession, dropping them one by one as he fought to cover her. The alien countered with a sweep of its arm, sending Lyran crashing into the wall. Pain flared through her body, but she pushed herself up, her vision swimming. Is that all you've got? She snarled. Isaac threw something at her, a small, cylindrical device. Catch! She snatched it midair, recognizing it instantly. A tactical charge. Isaac shouted, Get it to the spire. Lyran didn't hesitate. She dodged another ravager, her body moving on instinct as she sprinted toward the spire. The alien roared, closing in on her, but Isaac intercepted it, tackling the massive figure with a ferocity that shocked even her. Reaching the spire, Lyran jammed the charge into one of its conduits. The countdown blinked to life. 10 seconds. She spun, her blade slashing through a ravager that lunged for her back. Isaac, she shouted. He broke free from the alien, sprinting toward her as the charge ticked down. Move! The explosion ripped through the chamber, a deafening roar that sent shockwaves through the ground. The spire shattered, its green glow extinguished in an instant. The ravagers collapsed lifeless, as if their strings had been cut. Lyran and Isaac stumbled out of the smoke, battered but alive. Behind them, the alien lay motionless, its armor scorched and its body crushed beneath debris. Isaac turned to her, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. You did good, kid. She shook her head, her chest heaving. We're not done. He followed her gaze to the far end of the chamber, where another tunnel stretched into darkness. The fight wasn't over. Not yet, but for the first time, they had a chance, and Lyran was ready to take it.